Okay, I'd like to now introduce Michelle Davis, senior writer for Education Week Digital Directions, who has actually probably talked to many of you in the audience at different times for stories we've done over the years. Michelle is a very prolific writer for us at Education Week. She will be moderating the next panel discussion, during which she will lead a discussion on how best to leverage mobile devices, social media, and other innovations and technology to individualize education. This is something that we have written extensively about in Education Week. Our annual Technology Counts report last year, in fact, covered this issue. We continue to write a lot about it in digital directions and also in the pages of the newspaper. Michelle has written extensively about the role of social networking in education, the emergence of mobile computing in K-12, and the growth of virtual education. Previously, Michelle covered federal policy issues as a staff writer for Education Week. And please welcome Michelle Davis.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone enjoyed Chris's presentation as much as I did, and hopefully we'll follow up on some of the themes that he raised during the presentation. And now, hopefully everyone's ready to talk about using EdTech tools for individualizing education. We've got three guests who know a lot about pushing the envelope with technology in education, whether it's using smartphones, Twitter, Facebook, Ning, all of those things. We'll hear from Sean Gross, the managing director of EdTech consulting firm Digital Millennial Consulting, who also oversees North Carolina's Project Connect. We'll hear from Eric Scheninger, the principal of New Milford High School in New Jersey, and Tom Whitby, an adjunct professor at St. Joseph's College and a co-creator of Edchat on Twitter. He also has his own Ning site, the Educators PLN. He's very active on LinkedIn. He's everywhere. So, across the country, a lot of schools and districts still see these types of technology tools as the enemy. We just heard people talk about banning cell phones from schools and things like that. They're barring students from having cell phones in school, blocking Twitter or Facebook from school computers, and some administrators think that those pieces of technology belong only outside school walls. But my guests have embraced these new technologies as a way to boost education for students, whether it's through personalizing the educational experience students have, helping teachers improve their skills, or to garner resources and positive attention for their school. I'm going to start by asking each of the panelists to give a brief overview of what they're doing with technology in education. I'm going to start with Sean and ask him to describe Project Connect a little bit.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. So I'm responsible as the project director for Project Connect. Project Connect is an initiative whereby we provide students with smartphone devices, and we've provided now close to 3,500 students with smartphone devices that enable them to have access to instructional resources that are tied directly to algebra, geometry, calculus, and AP statistics. We were funded because of a research project that we initiated with the U.S. Department of Education back in 2006, where we were trying to find out why students were so disengaged in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And basically they told us that they wanted to utilize, number one, handheld devices, and number two, they wanted to take advantage of social networking technologies. So we integrated the combination of social networking technologies in with curriculum that's optimized for use over mobile phones, and experimented with Project Connect, which is now in its fourth year in North Carolina.
Great. Tom, you have a lot of different things going on. Why don't you start by telling us what Edchat is and also a little bit about your Ning site?
It's not going to make a lot of sense unless I know how many of you use Twitter? Okay, use it for professional development. How many use Twitter for professional development? The numbers are dropping. Center over here are not tweeters. How many of you are familiar with what a Ning site is? Oh, good. Okay. How many of you go to professional education Ning sites for professional development? Good. Edchat was developed on Twitter. For those of you who are familiar with Twitter, it's the use of a hashtag. What I would do on Twitter I would involve myself with other educators. I only follow educators, and most of the people who follow me are educators. I would engage people in conversations dealing with education. And at that time, if you were engaged on Twitter, you got to see the conversation that I would have with these people. And you could involve yourself in the conversation. The problem was, as soon as we stopped talking, that whole conversation, as valuable as it might have been, just went away, just disappeared. And if you weren't following us, you didn't see that conversation. So what we did was we developed a way using what's called a hashtag, it's the pound sign, called Edchat. And we picked a time, which would be Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock New York time, that we would discuss a specific topic on education. And anybody wanting to involve themselves in that topic could follow the Edchat hashtag and either participate in the discussion or just follow it. We use, there's a term that we use for social media called lurking and learning. You can lurk as much as you want and just watch and observe things, or you can actually involve and engage and you'll learn a lot quicker. So until you're comfortable, it's always good to watch and see what's going on for a while. So getting back to the Edchat thing. We picked 7 o'clock to be a good time, so we had this discussion. The first time we did it, it was quite successful. We had almost 100 educators involved in that chat. We then got a little bit fancier and decided that we would put out a poll on Sunday with 5 topics and have people select the topic that they wanted to talk about. And the one that was most popular would be discussed the following Tuesday at 7 o'clock. The second and third Edchat started to pick up numbers, and we started getting we started getting tweets from people in Europe. We have a great many American educators in Europe who could not follow the discussions because the time was not within their time zones. So they asked us to create another Edchat, which we did. So we have an Edchat at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, noon time, and then 7 o'clock Tuesday evenings. If you get onto Twitter tonight and follow the hashtag Edchat, you will see this discussion going on. It became quite popular. Right now, we have, every week, over 2,000 educators involved in these discussions. And they're putting out tweets in the thousands over a 1-hour period. It had a profound effect on our community, our educational community, not necessarily in the particular discussions, but usually what comes out afterwards. Because the next day, on Wednesday and Thursday, you can start to see the educational blogs all discussing what it was they discussed on the Edchat hashtag discussion. So that's how Edchat got started. What's interesting, it actually started with myself, Shelley Terrell, and Steve Anderson from North Carolina. Shelley Terrell was in Germany. I was in New York. We had this going. We won some educational blogging awards with it, and we never met each other till 6 months later when they flew Shelley in from Germany, they flew me in from New York, and they flew Eric from North Carolina, and Eric, and we all met in California for the first time. We had been connected for months, and this was the first face-to-face meeting that we ever had. And that's what Edchat does. And I'll talk about the Educators PLN later if you want.
Sure. And just to also add, now you have transcripts of the Edchat, so if someone misses it, you can go back.
Yeah, we archive every one of these so that we've got a wiki space. All of the Edchats for the last year have been archived, so you can go back and you can view everything that everybody said. One of the things about Edchat, though, it's kind of like walking into a large stadium of people. You can't follow everybody's conversation. So what you do is you hook up with 1 or 2 people and you have your dialogue going back and forth and you're really involved with a very rich discussion. And then later you can take a look at the entire archived thing to see what other people were saying in other areas of the chat.
That's great. Now, Eric, I know you use Twitter a lot, but you also use Facebook and a lot of other different types of technology at your school. Why don't you describe what's been really successful for you?
Well, first I have a confession to make. You know, Chris talked before about the principles that ban everything, social media, electronic devices. That was me a year and a half ago. There was even a reality TV show that I was in that showed my exploits of taking cell phones and electronic devices away from kids. You know, fast forward to now I'm the biggest advocate for the effective integration of all types of technology into the classroom. You know, when you combine it with a sound pedagogical foundation, these tools, as many people have mentioned, are one of the most engaging items that we can use to connect to our students. And for me, it all started with Twitter. and I got on Twitter to better communicate with my stakeholders. And what I did was just started sending out, you know, daily announcements, events. It's off.
It's technology at work.
I did turn it off. And what it led to was, it was a great medium for me to share my student and staff achievements. And I wasn't prepared for what was going to happen. What happened then was, I actually started following different educators, like Chris Lehman, like Tom Whitby, and I actually started learning about Web 2.0, which I had no idea what that was before March 2009. And the more I learned, the more I became fascinated with how my teachers could use these tools to engage the students. How I could use these tools not only to learn, but to grow and to share the great things going on in my school. The most important job of my most important job at New Milford High School is to brag about my school, is to tell everyone that I can the great things that my teachers and staff do every single day. Before social media, I didn't have that means. When you look at traditional forms of communication, snail mail, press releases, phone calls, you have a limited audience. Now, I have a separate Twitter account just for my high school. The students at my school, they knew that I loved Twitter. We had a meeting one day with members of student government, and they said, you know, Mr. Scheninger, we know you love Twitter, but it doesn't work for us. Facebook works for us. I swore off Facebook until this April, when I created a Facebook page for my high school, which is now a national model. And it's all because of my students. And what do I do on a Facebook page? I share things like how my students are taking school-issued iPods with scavenger hunts uploaded onto them to the Met in New York City, and how I'm now able to take pictures at the art show, put it out on Twitter, put it on the Facebook page, and how I was able to orchestrate a conference just this past weekend with a company called Schoology at my school, where 400 educators from 7 different states came for free, all sponsored, and yesterday I saw my teachers integrating the different tools and strategies that were discussed at that conference.
That's great. Well, let me follow up on that and ask you, you know, I think a lot of people in the audience like the idea of embracing all these technologies we've talked about today, but they run into roadblocks. They run into principals like you used to be who don't feel comfortable with those types of technologies in the buildings, or someone at my lunch table mentioned the fact that the district lawyers are the ones standing in the way of bringing in some of these types of technologies. How do people convince their district leadership to allow these types of things and not to be afraid of them?
Well, if I can start.
Go ahead.
You take risks. That's what I did. I didn't ask for permission. I believed in it, and again, that's a risk. I believed in it, I saw value, and I could say the rest is history in terms of how I've transformed. But the key is to model professional use, whether it's from a social media standpoint or to model effective practices with the technology. You know, we talked about cell phones before, okay? I didn't raise my hand high enough when Chris asked, but my school bans cell phones. I'm looking to change that. And how am I going to sell my community? When I'm ready, after my staff is trained, and I'm confident that we can effectively integrate them for student learning, which I now know we can. I even brought a speaker in this past weekend on cell phones and mobile devices. That's how you convince the naysayers and your boards of education and your parents when you consistently model professional and effective use. I now have parents that will email me and say, why aren't you talking about my kid on the Facebook page who did this? And I say, I'm sorry, and what do I do that minute? I put it up on the Facebook page. It's my job. And I feel that promoting my students and staff and the things that we're doing in the Milford High School is of utmost importance.
If I might, I remember seeing the hands go up before about all the people who banned the cell phones. And we talk about social learning and social networks. How many of you out there with parents or grandchildren have heard of webkins? Can I see your hands, please? How many have heard of penguins? Okay, these are 2 social media networks that kids are on before they're 6 years old. And they are learning social media, and they're learning through social media using these networks. Webkins has 5 million kids on it. It's just an incredible source for kids to learn. Toy manufacturers learn this. That's how they're teaching them about their toys. And they learned it much quicker than educators did. So kids who are learning on these social networks come into schools now, and we say, well, all that learning you did before, we're going to put that aside because you're not allowed to use that here in the school. It just doesn't make any sense. Going back to I remember the World's Fair back in the 60s. Maybe 1 or 2 of you were there. Okay, we still don't have flying cars. They predicted flying cars. We don't have flying cars. But if you were in the World's Fair in the 60s and they said to you, you know something, one of these days, these kids are going to be able to come into your classroom with a computer small enough to fit in their shirt pocket that will be stronger and more powerful than the computers that they used to send men to the moon. As a future educator, I would have been jumping up and down. And what do we do as educators? We ban them. The biggest problem is they were called cell phones to begin with. We can't call them cell phones. They're not phones. They are mobile learning devices. They are computers that kids learn from. And we have to think of it in those terms. And
well, Sean, let me go to you. You're not just thinking about the idea of allowing cell phones into schools. You're actually giving the smartphones out to the students. And I know that there were some teachers and administrators in your schools who were nervous about that. And while you're talking, I'm going to flash up a picture of the actual phone that you sometimes use, I guess, with some of your students.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So I'll address both your previous question and the point that you just made. As far as how to go about change within the school system, number one, we took the words and advice of Chris, who's standing back there, not listening to me. That's okay, Chris. What we did is we spoke directly to students first and foremost. And in 2006, in this area, because I live in Arlington, we went to DCPS, we went to Montgomery County Schools, we went to Arlington, we went to Fairfax. And we asked the students what their preferences were and what we could do to change instructional practices so that they became more engaged in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. When we went into the state of North Carolina, we talked about the statistics and the data that was collected from here in the DC area, and then we also collected national data from an organization called Project Tomorrow, who conducts a survey called the National Speak Up Survey. They take in, on average, 300,000 student inputs, and they look specifically at what students are interested in from an education technology perspective. They took our questions that we posed to the students in DC and put them into their survey instruments, and they found back in 2006 that an overwhelming majority, 80% of the 300,000, preferred to use mobile devices. So that was the first thing. The second thing from a professional development perspective is in the classrooms that I sit down with, or the rooms that I sit with teachers in, I go through an experiment with them. And what I have them do is I present to a bunch of Algebra 1 teachers a complex calculus problem. And I know there's only 3 out of 30 in the room that can solve the problem. I give some of the teachers a textbook, I give some of the teachers calculators, I give some of the teachers cell phones, I give some of the teachers laptop computers, and I give some of them TI-83 pluses. And I ask them to individually try to solve the problem. And after about 5 to 7 minutes, they get so deeply frustrated and are sweating and they want to get out of their seats. They're not allowed to talk to each other. Then there are note cards in the center of their table. And I said, okay, 10 minutes is up. Now you can use these note cards and walk around the room and use the note cards to try to find people that you think that might help you. So what we're doing is we're simulating instant messaging for them at that point. Following that, then I put them into groups and have them work in groups and create videos that they post onto a blog. But they don't know that I'm going to post a video on a blog. All they're doing is they're presenting to a group. What we're doing is we're simulating the experience of blogging technologies. I tell them the anxiety and frustrations that they felt during that period when they were alone, if they had a cell phone, if they had a calculator, if they didn't have anything, This is what our students feel on a day-to-day basis. They need to feel the frustration and anxiety that these students go through, ultimately. But they also recognize that these technologies will help them through this process. That exercise unto itself helped radically transform it. But then they went into more of a coaching and mentoring role where they went and they saw other teachers that were successfully implementing it and took from that, and that's how we were able to transform the school system into supporting the idea of mobile devices in the classroom.
Great. I'm going to do a quick poll here. You guys have talked about this, but does your school or district provide laptops or other mobile computing devices to students? We know that Sean does that in the districts that he works with, but you can use your remote to select A, if you provide mobile computing devices to every student, B, if you provide mobile computing devices to more than 50% of students, C, if you provide mobile computing devices but to fewer than 50% of students, and D, if you don't provide any mobile computing devices to students. So everyone use your clickers and choose your answer. Let's see. Well, that's a little bit disheartening. Most of you said that you provide mobile computing devices to fewer than 50% of students, or you don't provide mobile computing devices to any students. So let me ask you, I know sometimes in talking about providing laptops or smartphones or things like that to students, there are a lot of concerns about security and what students are going to be doing and accessing with these types of technology. So I want to start with Eric and ask you, what do you do about security when you have students on Skype, on blogs, on Facebook? How do you handle those types of concerns and those types of issues?
Well, you know, right now, I'll be honest, I'm not overly concerned. I'm a firm believer that if you treat the students like adults, they are going to rise to the occasion and act appropriately. You're always going to have to deal with discipline issues, no matter whether it's with mobile devices or swearing or getting in a fight. You deal with it appropriately. You have a discipline policy for a reason. And if they violate the policy, you deal with it like you would any other situation. You know, with the mobile devices, what I've done for this year is I wanted my students to be in more control of their own learning. Talk about creation, discussion, collaboration, communication. So what I developed this year was we used to have sort of like a waiver for students, pictures to be put on the website and such. What I did now was I made it this media waiver that parents are fully aware that in my school, students will possibly, depending on the teacher, be blogging, Skyping, using Twitter, using YouTube, using wikis, and the parents have the choice. They have the choice to deny their child that privilege or let them experience these wealth of opportunities and tools that we can now provide. And someone asked me the other day, what are the numbers at? We're still collecting the forms because we've been hit by budget cuts like everybody else, and over 80% of the parents have signed on to this waiver. So, the community, the stakeholders see that, these students are immersed in these tools outside of school. It only makes sense that we bring it into the instructional day.
I just want to ask Sean for a second. I want to make everyone understand that even though Sean gives these cell phones, these smartphones to students, they are not able to use them as a telephone. So that cuts down on a lot of problems.
Yeah, so from a security perspective, we turn off text messaging and we actually turn off the voice services on the phone. So they are truly mobile learning devices, which should be a new term that we all start utilizing, I think.
Thank you.
In addition to that, we have monitoring tools in place so we can actually see exactly what students are doing at any point in time. And no, we can't turn the cameras on the devices. But we can see on screen what students are doing. And while we think content filters are important and are legally required in order to fulfill the SIPA requirements, and we have them in place for both going on the cellular data network as well as obviously on the school's network, When a student recognizes that at any point in time an individual, a principal, a teacher, an instructional technology coordinator, a member of the State Department of Education can look at a device at any point in time to see if they're appropriately utilizing the device, it changes the way the student interacts with the device ultimately. So we do have these controls in place. On the flip side then, you look at student-owned devices and you start getting into privacy issues and concerns. And while we have had many districts talk to us about utilizing student-owned devices, I do tell them that it would probably be a very great challenge for us to put our monitoring tools on top of a student-owned device. So that's something to take into consideration when you're talking about the two.
I agree with Eric as far as this being a discipline issue. It is a discipline issue. The whole idea of cell phones is not going to go away. The whole idea of social media is not going to go away. We have to start training kids at a very early age how to be good digital citizens. So I'm talking about elementary school education. We had a speaker today at the lunch thing who mapped out, they've got introduction of cell phones in first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. We need to do that kind of stuff. This is very much like the arguments they used against sex education in public schools. The same arguments. It's crazy. These kids, if we don't teach them the proper use of cell phones and how to be a good digital citizen, they're going to learn it on the streets. And what they're learning on the streets is not what they're supposed to be learning. And then we're going to wind up with more people and incidents like we had that poor kid who jumped off the George Washington Bridge. But people have to be taught this. This is not something that they're born with. They don't know how to handle this stuff, and if we don't start teaching them at an early age to deal with something that they're going to be using for the rest of their lives into the future, we've got a problem. We can't teach what we're comfortable with. We have to teach the skills that our kids need in their world. Our world is done, folks. We're here. We're moving into theirs.
Great. I want to do one more poll here. And this is about social networking. Does your district or school allow students and staff access to social networking sites for educational purposes? And I know all three of these gentlemen here use social networking, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Ning, or from Sean's perspective, the students sort of create their own social network through his program. So you can select A if, yes, you allow social networking sites to be accessed, or B if you allow limited access to some social networking sites, or C if you block all social networking sites.
The state won't allow me to let them access YouTube.
Ah, that's sort of what I expected. The majority of the schools block access to social networking sites. I want to just ask one quick question, if you could just answer very quickly, is sort of the aspect of social networking on education, whether you think that is particularly beneficial or if it's just sort of a fun thing for kids to do. Does it have a big impact on their learning?
I think it does because, I learn best when I communicate with my peers. Why would we deprive students of that opportunity? In terms of the poll, we went from blocking everything to now the only site that's blocked in my school is Facebook because I have to be able to justify how we're going to use it for educational purposes. We just got YouTube unblocked. But how are we going to teach kids to communicate? And, it really comes down to communication and collaboration.
So as far as social networking is concerned, this was the thing that most surprised our researchers. When we told educators and administrators that we were going to create blogs on polynomials and solving linear equations and matrices, most of the adult administrators looked at us and laughed at the idea. But students told us that they were going to utilize it. So what's happened within Project Connect is that students are taking their devices and they're creating videos highlighting specific steps that they're taking towards solving a problem. Then they also, on the flip side, if they run into difficulty, they'll take a video highlighting the steps and show where they're having difficulty in achieving proficiency on a given problem. And then the other students within the community are able to respond to it. What's evolved from that are basically personal learning communities. So students that are basically in Durham, North Carolina, they could be in Winston, North Carolina. We have some students now actually in Columbus, Ohio. We've got students that have come on in the UK, and then our largest installed site is in Onslow County in Jacksonville, North Carolina, are communicating with one another through blogs, and then they're also able to utilize instant messaging. So the thing that most surprised us, and again, and our research team, was the fact that these students started empowering their own education process. And the social networking component really was the critical success factor for us as far as our project was concerned.
I think most of us are social learners. Kids are social learners. They learn socially all the time. They've got their own networks. The biggest problem we have with this, though, are fighting the myths of social media. One of the big myths is that child predators are going to steal my kid away and from the internet, and they're going to just take them away. I'll never see the kid again. When you look at the facts, though, and I work at a Catholic college, so I said this out loud, and everybody came down on me. When you look at the facts, the kid is safer on the internet than he would be going to church or hanging out with family members, because that's where they're going to be probably preyed upon by a child predator. It's either going to be a family member, a close friend, or, in some cases, the clergy. Now, if we're dealing with facts, we should deal with facts. They're going to be safer on the internet. Okay, that's number one thing. The other problem that we have would be educators involving themselves with social media. If you consider technology itself as requiring a literacy, and it does, it's the media literacy, probably 80% of our educators are illiterate in that regard, because they're not keeping up with what's going on today. One of the things that we need them to do is involve themselves with social media so they can connect with other teachers around the world and see what tools they're using. How are they using technology to work with their kids? Best practices are being shown on the internet all the time. I have a NIG site called the Educators PLN. For those of you with pens in hand, it's www.edupLN.com. There are 6,000 educators on there all sharing their ideas. There are 362 educational videos for people to use for professional development, to use in the class. All of these are downloadable. There are sources that will teach you how to use Twitter. You can guide yourself through the entire thing. It's all very intuitive in order to do that, so you don't have to worry about making mistakes in front of people. But these are the things that we need educators to do. They have to be aware of what technology is available to them and the potential that this technology has. And it doesn't matter what tools they use, because Twitter 6 months from now may not be around. Ning probably won't be around. There are other things that are not going to be around, but something will step in to take their place. Once they buy the idea of social learning, the tools don't matter at that point.
Let me open it up for questions. We've got mic runners, so raise your hands if you have a question. There's one back there.
Alice Riley, Fairfax County Public Schools. First of all, let me say I agree with everything you're saying, that we need to do this, we need to model this, we need to examine our policies and try to have our change our policies to keep up with the changing technology. How would you respond to the legal community that says, no, you can't do this thing according to federal laws such as COPA and FERPA?
COPA doesn't apply.
COPA would apply if they're utilizing the device inside the school.
There is a debate about that.
Well, so as far as the legal argument is concerned, we've actually had the attorney from the National School Board Association look at this very issue. So when you're talking about the concerns over, again, student-owned devices, when the students are bringing the devices within the schools, and they're utilizing the device for instructional purposes as far as COPA and SIPA are concerned, the devices should be going through a Wi-Fi network and they should be going through your content filter. That's, that's one side. But if the devices are then leaving the school and they are purchased by the school, you're going to have some form of a SIPA or COPA compliant filter in place when the devices leave the school, whether it be a laptop, whether it be a netbook, whether it be a tablet, whether it be a smartphone. That's to ensure that you, and again, you maintain compliance as far as the law is concerned. If they're student-owned devices, like I said, you're going to get into some tricky issues there, namely with probably the ACLU concerning privacy concerns, and we actually haven't gone deep enough into the discussion. But if you want more information, I know that the attorneys from the NSBA have started looking at this very issue.
Sounds like that might be a good resource, as well as iNACOL might have some information on that too.
Sounds like a good story.
Maybe in the future. Anyone else have a question? Go ahead.
I'm Alan Quimby from Harrisonburg City Public Schools. I was just wondering, we use some closed social networking in schools, Edmodo and Ning and things like that. But I'm wondering at the school where you had to get parent permission to use YouTube and the social networking sites, you said 20% of the kids haven't really responded yet. What happens to the students that are not able to participate in the meaningful learning that's going on?
Well, if a parent says, no, I do not want my student posting content to the internet, then my teachers have to develop an alternative assignment, plain and simple. We're trying to avoid those issues. I'm saying roughly 80% because my one secretary is now going through all the forms. And I'm going to have that data soon. But, what we're looking at is, I've been now thoroughly immersed in social networking and certain forms of mobile technology for almost a year now. And I've had not one parent come to me complaining about any type of content that's been posted online. Because we make sure that any content is directed to teaching and learning. And if you do that, like I said before, you're not going to have any fears. The one issue, in terms of that last question is, there seems to be so much discrepancies in terms of what one district is doing compared to another one. And it seems like the schools that don't want to move towards technology integration are the ones that, get behind lawyers to find ways why they can't do it. But we should be trying to find ways that we can. My district is living proof. My town is a blue-collar community. We don't have all the money to spend on technology. We use what we have. We make what's available to each and every student to the best of our ability. But no one's breathing down my neck saying, you're not allowed to do this, or I have a problem with it, because they're doing it all over the place. And as Tom said, we have to teach the kids to be digitally responsible. Did anyone see the middle school principal that was banning Facebook? Anyone see that? Okay, that principal's in my backyard. All right? And their board members are talking to me about ways that we can effectively integrate technology.
I just want to follow up on that with Sean about the issue of equity, some students having the technology and some students not having the technology. I know in some of the schools you work with, there are algebra classes where all the students have the smartphones and are using them for algebra, and then other classes that don't have this technology.
It is an incredible source of debate and concern because the students in Onslow County, in Jacksonville, all the 9th grade Algebra 1 students have the devices, and then when you move up into the subject areas of geometry in Algebra 2, most of the students actually lose the devices at that point. The concern there just comes up over the whole issue of the digital divide. And what is concerning to me when we started the project is that in a traditional one-to-one initiative, most of the school systems automatically assume when a laptop is distributed that 100% of the students have internet access at home, which is absolutely not true at all. So, we don't have an unlimited amount of resources as far as the project is concerned. The vision of the superintendent and all the superintendents we work with is to provide equity of access in terms of all the devices. But now what this school system and other school systems are looking at are policies under which to take advantage of student-owned devices. And to the extent to which student-owned devices can come into play as far as the learning process is concerned, that's going to help with the equity of access issue. But ultimately, again, I would caution anybody who is considering a one-to-one initiative, take into consideration that when you issue those laptops, that those socioeconomically disadvantaged populations aren't necessarily going to have the access at home. And also, take into consideration that learning just doesn't happen at school and at home. Learning happens in between as well. The student doesn't leave the school system at 2:30 and automatically go home to gain access to a Wi-Fi access point. The student wants to stay connected, they want to have the ability to communicate, and they have to have that ability for immediacy in terms of help when they're working on a particular assignment or problem.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Nobody? Well, I have a question. Tom, let me ask you. Don't be scared. How have educators been able to interact on these, like, for example, on the Ning site with your personal learning community website? How have they been able to take what they're learning there and actually move it into their classroom, especially if they may be doing it on their own and not part of a school-wide effort?
The comments that I get most often from either the educator PLN or on Twitter is that this is the best professional development these teachers have ever had, because they're getting ideas and they are collaborating with educators all over the world. Skype, for instance, is something that these teachers are hooking up with teachers from around the world, and they're Skyping from class to class, and we're not talking next door, we're talking around the world. There was a class in Vietnam hooked up with a class in Iowa, and they were exchanging ideas back and forth. So what's happening is educators are having their eyes opened up to what the possibilities are. And we're at a point in time, at one point in time, educators could decide, I either want to use the technology or I don't want to use the technology. That was a choice that they were given. And many of them chose to use the technology, many of them chose not to use the technology. But we've come so far with the advancement of technology that it's no longer a choice for teachers. You know, I often say that it's okay for a teacher to decide to live in a cave. They've got every right to live in that cave, but they don't have the right to pull their students in there with them. These kids are going to need this technology, and these are the skills that we have to be teaching them for their world, once again. And the internet provides access to people who are using technology successfully, and they're helping those people who are looking for those answers. Even if they don't find the answers, educators are learning the questions to ask when they go back to their district based on other people's experiences. So it's been very helpful.
Great. I want to thank all of our panelists and give them a big round of applause for a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, panelists. I think that, listening to that kind